A routine fishing expedition off the coast of Labrador turned into a heart-stopping adventure when crew members spotted an unusual passenger atop a drifting iceberg. What they discovered would change their lives forever. The Northern Swan a sturdy crab fishing vessel, sliced through the icy waters of the North Atlantic as Mallory Harrion, the vessel's captain, stood at the helm, her experienced eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of danger or promise. The sea was particularly choppy that day, with swells that made the boat rock and sway. Cliff and Alan Russell, Mallory's crewmates and longtime friends, were busy checking the crab pots and preparing for another long day of fishing. The trio had been working these waters for years, but nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to encounter. As Mallory guided the Northern Swan through a field of small icebergs, a common sight in these parts, something unusual caught her eye. About 2.5 miles offshore, a strangely shaped iceberg floated in the waves. At first, she dismissed it as just another chunk of ice, but something about its silhouette nagged at her subconscious. "Hey guys," Mallory called out, her voice barely audible over the wind and waves. "Come take a look at this." Cliff and Alan made their way to the wheelhouse, curious about what had captured their captain's attention. As they drew closer to the mysterious iceberg, the shape became clearer. It wasn't just the ice that was odd, there was something else on top of it. Mallory's heart skipped a beat as realization dawned. The object on top of the iceberg was moving. It was small but definitely alive. "There's something alive up there," she shouted, her voice a mix of excitement and disbelief. Cliff and Alan exchanged puzzled glances, then squinted toward the iceberg. "Are you sure?" Cliff asked, his brow furrowed in concentration. It could just be a piece of ice, or his words trailed off as the creature on the iceberg shifted, its movement unmistakable against the stark white backdrop. "I'll be damned," Alan whispered, his eyes wide with amazement. Mallory's mind raced. What could it be? A seal? A bird? Whatever it was clearly in trouble, stranded on a floating island of ice miles from shore. Without hesitation, she adjusted their course, steering toward the mysterious iceberg. As the Northern Swan cut through the choppy waters toward the iceberg, the sky suddenly darkened. Mallory glanced up, her experienced eyes widening with concern. "Cliff, check the radar," she called out, her voice tense. "This doesn't look good." Cliff rushed to the equipment, his face paling as he studied the screen. "We got a problem, Cap. There's a rogue wave heading our way, and it's a big one." Just as the words left his mouth, they saw it, a monstrous wall of water at least 30 feet high, racing toward them from the port side. It was a freak occurrence, a giant wave that seemed to appear out of nowhere. "Brace for impact," Mallory shouted, spinning the wheel hard to starboard in a desperate attempt to position the boat to ride out the wave. The next few moments were chaos. The Northern Swan was lifted like a toy, tossed about by the furious sea. The crew clung to whatever they could grab, their world turned sideways as the wave crashed over them. For a heart-stopping minute, it seemed as if the boat might capsize, but then, miraculously, they were through it. The Northern Swan righted itself, water cascading off the deck. "Everyone okay?" Mallory called out, her voice hoarse. Groans and affirmatives came from Cliff and Alan. They were battered and soaked, but alive. As the adrenaline subsided, a new worry set in. The wave had pushed them off course, and worse, they'd lost sight of the iceberg with the stranded creature. "Where is it?" Alan asked, scanning the horizon. "Did we lose it?" Mallory felt a pang of despair. Had they lost their chance to help the stranded animal? But then, squinting through the mist left by the wave, she spotted something. "There!" she shouted, pointing to a small white speck in the distance. "It's further out now, but we can still reach it." The crew sprang into action, checking for damage and preparing to continue their rescue mission. The unexpected wave had cost them precious time, and they knew the iceberg, and whatever was on it wouldn't last forever in these treacherous waters. As they set off again, more determined than ever, Mallory couldn't shake the feeling that this delay might have dire consequences for the stranded creature. After their harrowing encounter with the rogue wave, the crew of the Northern Swan approached the iceberg with a mixture of excitement and fear. The closer they got, the more puzzled they became. "I think it's a baby seal," Alan called out, squinting his eyes. It was a reasonable guess. Seals were common in these waters, and it wouldn't be unusual for a pup to end up stranded. Mallory maneuvered the boat closer, careful to avoid any hidden ice beneath the surface. The engine's low rumble seemed to startle the creature, which scurried to the edge of the iceberg, its movements quick and jerky. "Wait a minute," Cliff said, his voice filled with confusion. "Seals don't move like that." As they drew within 50 feet of the iceberg, the true nature of their discovery became clear. The creature was small, no bigger than a house cat, with fur that was mottled white and gray. But what caught their attention were its pointed ears and bushy tail features decidedly unseal-like. "What in the world?" Alan breathed, his eyes wide with disbelief. The animal stood on the ice, its body hunched and shivering. Even from a distance, they could see its ribs protruding through its fur, a clear sign of starvation. Its eyes, dark and frightened, darted between the boat and the vast expanse of ocean surrounding its icy prison. Mallory felt her heart clench. Whatever this creature was, it was in dire straits, stranded miles from shore on a melting iceberg. It faced certain death without intervention. "We have to help it," she said firmly, her mind already racing with possible rescue scenarios. "But first, we need to figure out what we're dealing with." Mallory grabbed a pair of binoculars from the wheelhouse and studied the creature intently. Years of experience in these waters had taught her about the local wildlife, but this animal seemed out of place. Suddenly, recognition dawned on her face. "It's an Arctic fox," she exclaimed, lowering the binoculars. "But how on earth did it get out here?" Cliff and Alan crowded around her, their faces a mix of amazement and concern. "An Arctic fox this far out to sea?" Cliff asked, incredulous. Mallory nodded, her brow furrowed in thought. "They're known to venture out onto the ice in search of food seals, fish, birds' eggs, but I've never heard of one getting stranded like this." The crew fell silent, contemplating the fox's predicament. Alan was the first to speak up. "It must have been on a larger ice sheet that broke apart," he theorized. "Poor thing probably got stuck on this piece as it drifted out to sea." Mallory agreed. "That's likely what happened. Arctic foxes are curious and resourceful, but this little guy bit off more than he could chew." As they watched, the fox paced the edge of the iceberg, its movements growing weaker by the minute. The gravity of the situation sank in. Without their help, this remarkable creature wouldn't survive much longer. "So what's the plan, Cap?" Cliff asked, turning to Mallory. "How do we get a wild Arctic fox off a melting iceberg in the middle of the ocean?" Mallory's eyes narrowed with determination. "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but we're going to figure it out. We didn't come all this way to let this little fighter die out here." As the crew began to brainstorm rescue ideas, they watched anxiously as the iceberg continued to melt, its edges crumbling into the sea. The Arctic fox, now visibly weakened, paced in tight circles, its survival instincts warring with its fear of the strange boat and humans nearby. "We need to act now," Mallory said, her voice tight with urgency. "That bird won't last much longer, and neither will our furry friend." But the question remained. How could they rescue the fox without putting themselves in danger or frightening the animal into the deadly cold water? Alan suggested trying to lure the fox with food, but Mallory shook her head. "It's too far and too scared. We'd never get close enough." They considered trying to throw a net, but the distance and the fox's agility made that plan too risky. Every idea seemed to have a fatal flaw, and with each passing minute, the situation grew more desperate. Cliff, who had been silently studying the iceberg and the surrounding waters, finally spoke up. "We'll have to break up the ice," he said, meeting Mallory's eyes. "It's the only way to get close enough." Mallory and Alan exchanged worried glances. They knew Cliff was a highly intelligent sailor. If he said this was the only way, they believed him. But the risks were enormous. "Break up the ice," Alan repeated, his voice uncertain. "Cliff, that's incredibly dangerous. We could damage the boat or, worse, cause the berg to hear is your corrected text with punctuation fixed. Asterisk flip with the fox still on it." Asterisk Cliff nodded solemnly. "I know the risks, but if we do nothing, that fox is dead for sure. At least this way, it has a chance." Mallory took a deep breath, weighing their options. As captain, the final decision rested with her. She looked at the fox, then back at her crew. "All right," she said finally. "Cliff, talk us through it. How do we do this?" Cliff quickly outlined his plan. They would use the boat to create a series of controlled collisions, fracturing the iceberg into smaller pieces. The goal was to break off a section close to the fox, giving them a chance to get near enough for a rescue. "Mallory, you're our best at the helm," Cliff said. "You need to maneuver us in. Alan and I will be on deck with nets and ropes, ready to act the moment we have an opening." With the plan set, they sprang into action. Mallory guided the Northern Swan toward the iceberg, her hands steady on the wheel despite the tension coursing through her. Cliff and Alan stood ready on the deck, nets in hand, their eyes fixed on the frightened fox. The first impact sent shudders through the boat. Ice cracked and split, the sound sharp in the cold air. The fox yelped in terror, scrambling to keep its footing on the shifting surface. "Easy, Mallory," Cliff called. "Just a bit more." Another collision, another splintering of ice. The fox was now trapped on a piece of ice barely bigger than a kitchen table. "One more should do it," Cliff shouted, but before Mallory could maneuver for another hit, the weakened ice gave way beneath the fox's paws. With a frightened yip, the animal plunged into the icy water. "Now," Cliff roared, "this is our chance." The fox, panicked and struggling in the frigid sea, paddled frantically. Soon, it got exhausted from its ordeal and half-frozen from its plunge into the icy water. Alan stood at the ready, net in hand, his muscles tense with anticipation. "Now, Alan," Mallory shouted from the helm. "It's now or never." In a heart-stopping moment, Alan swung the net with all his might. The net hit the water with a splash, enveloping the fox. His face contorted with effort as he began to lift. "It's heavy," he grunted, straining against the waterlogged weight. "I got you," Cliff shouted, rushing to Alan's side. Together they heaved, muscles straining, faces red with exertion. With a mighty effort, they lifted the soaking, shivering creature over the gunwale and onto the deck. For a moment, the crew stood in stunned silence, the reality of what they had just accomplished sinking in. Then, almost in unison, they erupted in cheers and laughter, the release of tension palpable. "We did it!" Mallory exclaimed, her eyes shining with a mixture of relief and disbelief. "We actually rescued an Arctic fox from the middle of the ocean." As the initial excitement subsided, the crew's focus shifted to their unexpected passengers' well-being. The fox, though alive, was in a sorry state. It fought weakly against the net for a few moments before collapsing from sheer exhaustion. "Quick, get those old blankets from the hold," Mallory ordered, her voice filled with concern. "We need to get it warm and dry." Cliff carefully lifted the fox from the net, while Alan rushed to create a makeshift bed from the blankets. They gently placed the animal on the soft pile, noting with worry how its ribs protruded beneath its wet fur. "Poor thing must be starving," Cliff muttered. "What do Arctic foxes eat, anyway?" The crew rummaged through their supplies, determined to find something suitable. Alan emerged from the galley with a triumphant grin, holding a packet of cheese and some crackers. "This ought to do it," he said confidently. To their surprise, the fox turned its nose up at the offered snack, too weak to even show interest. Frustration and concern etched the crew's faces as they watched their rescue teeter on the brink. Then Mallory had an idea. "Wait a minute," she said, disappearing into the galley. She returned moments later with a tin of Vienna sausages. "Let's try this." The effect was immediate. The fox's nose twitched and its eyes focused on the tin. With a delicate touch, Mallory presented a tiny morsel to the fox. To everyone's relief and delight, the animal devoured it eagerly. As they continued to feed and care for their guest, Mallory noticed a gradual change. The fox's eyes grew brighter, its movements more purposeful. Strength was returning to the resilient creature. But with this improvement came a new realization. Mallory's brow furrowed as she watched the fox. "We can't take him back to the city," she said slowly. "He needs a wild place to call home." The crew fell silent, pondering this new challenge. Then Cliff's face lit up. "What about Foxhaven Island?" he suggested, referring to a small uninhabited island they often passed on their fishing routes. Mallory's eyes widened. "That's perfect. It has these ponds full of fish and plenty of little critters for hunting. It's just wild enough." With their new plan in place, the Northern Swan changed course. As they approached Foxhaven Island, Alan remembered something. "There's an old doghouse in the storage shed on the north side," he said. "We could set it up as a temporary shelter for our friend here." When they reached the island, the fox seemed to sense the change in its fortunes. As the boat neared the shore, it cautiously emerged from its blanket nest, shaking itself vigorously. The crew watched with a mixture of joy and sadness as their unexpected companion prepared to leave. Cliff gently lowered the gangplank, and the fox took its first tentative steps onto solid ground. It paused at the edge of the boat, looking back at the crew as if in gratitude, before bounding onto the beach. The fishermen stood in silence, watching as the fox explored its new home, its bushy tail held high with newfound confidence. Mallory felt a lump in her throat as she observed the creature's transformation from a desperate castaway to a wild animal in its element. "Well, crew," she said softly, "I'd say this is one fishing trip we'll never forget." As the Northern Swan pulled away from Foxhaven Island, the crew caught one last glimpse of their Arctic friend. The fox stood on a rocky outcrop, silhouetted against the setting sun, a symbol of resilience in the unexpected adventures life can bring. Their fishing nets may have been empty, but their hearts were full. They had saved a life and gave a story they would tell for years to come. As they set course for home, each member of the crew knew they had been part of something truly extraordinary, a reminder of the wonders that await those who venture into the unknown. What started as a strange sight on an iceberg had become an unforgettable tale of compassion and quick thinking on the high seas. The Arctic fox, given a second chance at life, disappeared into the underbrush, ready to start its next adventure. What would you have done if you'd spotted a stranded animal at sea? Have you ever had an unexpected animal encounter that changed your perspective? Tell us in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.